Hello, this is James. Just before we get going with the podcast, one more chance to remind you that we are in the last few days of enrolment for Mark Dawson's Advertising for Authors course. It only opened once in 2016. We may get to it again this year, but possibly 2018. So if you think it's going to be the right course for you, you've got a few days left. We're probably going to close it in the middle of next week, so 4th or 5th of April, around there. Is it the right course for you? Well, it's an advanced course, no question about that. It's for authors who want to get sign-ups onto their mailing list and sales of their books driven by social media advertising. It'll help you get other things in place, but you probably need to have some inventory, and by that I mean 2 or 3 books at this stage, or at least in the process of getting those, preferably getting towards a box set. Or non-fiction works in a slightly different way. We've got a growing band of non-fiction authors who are using the course. If you're in doubt, do take advantage of the refund if you want to. You can just sign up for $75 a month, pay the first $75, have a look at the full course and its materials, and then if it's not for you, you think it's too advanced or whatever the reason, you don't have to give us a reason. You can get your money back. If it is for you, it may change everything for you. Now, I gave you a few testimonials in the last podcast. I'm just going to give you one in this one because it's a woman called Heather who came to see us in London. She actually lives in Portugal and spent her time in between Africa and Portugal. It's not her books that she's using the course for, it's actually her father's. It's a very touching situation, and Heather was very kind enough to tell us what the course had done for her.
My name's Heather Stretch, and I represent my father, Peter Rimmer, and he is an African English novelist, and he's been writing books probably since he was in his early 20s, and he's now nearly 80, and for all his life he has just been trying to get his books published. Through the encouragement of the course and getting the ideas out of the course, it just all came together, and that's been the game changer. It's just totally changed the sales. The sales are just, since late last year, the sales have just been increasing. And this has totally been our best year in sales. So, yeah. I just wish to God my father was in this room. He would be absolutely indebted. Mark has changed the whole thing for us, and it's been amazing, his course. I just can't recommend it enough. And you know, if anybody's a bit hesitant about wanting to do it, just don't hesitate. You've got to do it.
We love meeting Heather and hearing her story, and I hope you enjoyed hearing that as well. Okay, look, I need to give you the URL, which I didn't give you before, which is selfpublishingformula.com/ads17, ADS17. So if you are interested in the course, you can pop along there and have a look at it. In the meantime, a great episode of the podcast coming up, and one where I get a little bit hot under the collar.
2 writers, one just starting out, the other a bestseller. Join James Blatch and Mark Dawson and their amazing guests as they discuss how you can make a living telling stories. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
Hello, yes, here we are, Mark Dawson and James Blatch on the Self-Publishing Formula podcast. Thank you so much indeed for joining us. I hope you find our podcast useful, a useful hour spent during your week as indie authors to work out how to do things like market and sell your books, all the crucial stuff. That's what we do. We've had a good week, and we are going to have a really good interview, and I am personally very, very excited about today's interview.
You've combed your hair specially.
I did. I brushed my hair for this because Susan Grant is a bit of a hero of mine. She is an absolutely awesome person. She writes really interesting, sort of cross-genre books. And she's a remarkable woman. She would have been a fighter pilot in the United States Air Force, but they didn't allow women to fly on the front line. So she flew fighter jets, the F-5s or the equivalent T-38s, I think they were. If you know your jets, they're like the F-5s. Don't do that. She flew those and trained the young jocks who then went off to the front line. Today's world, she would be allowed on the front line. Today, she is a Boeing 747 captain with United, I think. I did ask her in the interview. And so she flies around the world. She's in charge of this huge aeroplane, the iconic jumbo jet aircraft, and she writes every spare moment. So she taps away on keyboards in her Hong Kong hotel room on layovers, and she writes several series of books which have, if you look at some of the front covers, they have sort of fighter planes on them and a bit of space alien stuff as well, and a bit of romance in there. So really interesting. She works very hard at what she's doing, and she's had some great success. She's very tuned into the indie world and getting into it more now, I think. I'm very excited about sort of going to the next level. So we thought she'd be a great interviewee, and we weren't wrong. It's a really, really good interview. So without further ado, let's hear from my heroine. What are you going to say?
Say, listeners, James is blushing like a fanboy.
I am a fanboy. Let's hear from Susan.
Hi, I'm Susan Grant. I'm a New York Times bestselling Rita-winning author, and I'm a proud indie now after being in traditional publishing for a very long time with 21 books. So I'm starting over this year.
That's excellent. Now, there's lots of exciting reasons why I'm thrilled to be talking to you today, not least because you used to be a fighter pilot and you are currently a Boeing 747 pilot. Is that correct?
Yes, I was actually an instructor for people, men in those days, who went on to fly fighters. But when I was in the Air Force, I was not. I was prevented from flying fighters. I didn't have the right body parts.
Yeah, it's a shame that that lasted so long like that. But you flew F5s, right? Is that right?
T-38s, the non-combat version.
Oh, T-38s. Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. Look, do you know what? When somebody off the street sees a T-38 fly over, this is what NASA astronauts fly, right? When they see one of those jets flying over, it's a fighter jet as far as they're concerned. You know, you may not have flown, unfortunately for you, didn't get perhaps your hands on an F-15 or something, but you're a fighter pilot as far as I'm concerned, so because you flew a fighter jet. And
they go supersonic, and they have afterburners. So we wore G suits and helmets, and
exactly. And there's very cool pictures of you. And the F5 was the combatant aircraft in Top Gun, which people might remember as well. So it's the same sort of airframe. And that's exciting, and not least for me, because the regular listeners to this podcast know that I'm writing a book based on the RAF in the 1960s. That's my opening book. My father, like you, was a pilot. He did have the right body parts, though, so he was allowed to fly fighters. We should say that's changed both in the States and in the UK now. But I guess when you went through it, it must have been just a few years after you, not long after you.
It was quite a long time. I'm trying to think. I got out in 1989.
Okay.
And I think it changed sometime in the 90s.
Yeah. That's there's still one or two places. I think submarines may still be resisting in the UK, women, but there you go. So that's an exciting. You've got this background in flying and aviation, and now you fly the iconic 747, one of the great airliners of my lifetime, and it's sort of feels like it might be in its last decade or so, because airlines don't seem to be buying jumbo jets as much anymore. But what an exciting life.
It's been very exciting. And I'm one of those right-brained, left-brained people. So it's the constant back and forth. And I think I love what I do and traveling because it lets me put that into my books.
Yeah, well, we'll come on to your books in a moment. I should just say, if people are flying, it's Delta, I think you fly for? United, sorry. Oh, my goodness, I said one of the big competitors. You fly for United with your whizzy new business class. And do you fly under your author name? Is Susan Grant your name as a pilot? Mm-hmm. I'm just thinking people are going to be sitting there listening.
I just can't. I have enough in my head. I'll just keep one name.
Yeah.
And everyone at work is really supportive. I started writing in 1998 with the goal of publication. And my first books came out in 2000, so it happened quickly. And the fact that I was a pilot and was writing about pilots was the angle that got me looked at and bought and published.
Yeah, well, you should use everything you've got, right, to get yourself ahead.
I know you do.
Yeah.
So it was a different world back then with publishing, though, than it is now.
Yeah, you've certainly lived through that, and we'll talk about that transition as well in a moment. Let's talk about the book so people understand what you write. I think your books are, from the outside, they look quite a curious mix. And, people often say to us, oh, my book's not a particular genre, that's why I'm having trouble selling. And then I look at your books, which do cross a couple of genres, really. And, some of them have strong fantasy elements to them. In fact, all of them, I think, have strong fantasy elements to them. But then there's also fighter jets, which we'd recognise from the real world on the front cover, and there's usually a pretty sexy looking man looking out from your book covers. So just explain, in your words, what the genre is.
I like to explain it this way. If Dad was a science fiction book and Mom was a romance book and they had a kid, that's what I write. I write hybrids where I'm telling a fully realized science fiction story, but over the course of the story, two people meet, fall in love, and we have a romance that develops and has a positive, happy ending. So there's a definite balance. You will please some science fiction writers sometimes more, maybe the romance readers more, but I feel like it's a balancing act. But, I love Star Wars science fiction that has some element of romance in it. And so that's what I write. It's what I will read. Not that I'll always write this, and I do write other things, but it's where I got my start and what my readers want to read from me.
And you obviously were a bit of a leader as a woman pilot in the early days, although, as we discussed, missed that moment when they were fully accepted into flying. Do your women take a lead role in your books, or is it the man who's going to be flying the jets and doing the saving?
They both, my male and female characters will fly, but I definitely write strong women, and the characters are going to be who the characters are. My women just happen to end up being strong, not always confident, but they might find they're confident. And I that's part of their character arcs.
Okay, so
but I like
It's great. And you started back in 98. I guess when you came out of the Air Force, are you transitioning to commercial pilot flying then, or?
It was actually 10 years into being a commercial pilot. I had young kids, and I was just about a year into flying the 747. I had flown 737s, the smaller airliners, for going on 10 years at that point. And I had my kids at the doctors, so they had their checkups, and I spoke to another mom, and she had written a book. And I said, wow, she wrote a book. I never met or spoke to anyone that had written a book. And I always loved creative writing and making up stories. I said, if she can write a book, I could write a book. And that's how everything started. I missed that first book. I wrote a 600-page historical epic that could never probably sell, and I never tried to sell it. But just the joy of waking up and knowing no rules and just writing and having the pages just flow. That was way before my internal editor kicked in, or before I thought about what readers might want to read. I wrote that book for me. And but then the next book I wrote was to try to get a book published.
So you thought a little bit more commercially about the second book, and was your second book onwards this hybrid science fiction romance?
It was a time travel romance, and I went to a writers' conference in around 1998. We got to listen to some editors, and at that time they said time travel romance is the hottest new thing. So I said, I'll write one of those. So I got on the airplane to fly home from the conference, and I had a napkin, and I started writing out the idea of this story on a napkin of a Navy fighter pilot who has to eject during a lightning storm, ends up in 1821, and is hauled aboard a pirate ship.
Fantastic! And, what a great hook!
It was so much fun to write. The culture clash, which is really what my science fiction romance books are all about. I love the culture clash: royals versus commoners, military versus non, being fish out of water. That's what I love to write.
Sounds great. And your early success then, so you got a deal fairly quickly within a couple of years. And just tell me what that was like and how that worked out for you.
I got my agent from that first writers' conference. So I really, in those days, I don't know if it still applies, attending writers' conferences was the way to get well past the gatekeepers. We all know of that recent blog, and they talked about having the publishers, the gatekeepers. In those days, they really were, and you needed an agent. And the story goes, the agent was in bed going through her slush pile next to her husband. She's a well-known agent. And her husband just picked up, which were my first 3 chapters I submitted, which was this time travel, and it begins in the cockpit of an F-18. And he said, honey, you need to read this. This is really interesting. And that's how I ended up getting her as the agent. I got the notice of an editor through the contest circuit. So she had put the manuscripts in with editors, but I started entering as many contests as I could. And the prize was to get your manuscript in front of an editor. So I started winning, and I got my manuscripts in front of the editors. And then it was a mini bidding war for my books between 2 publishers. And I went with one of them and stayed with them until they started to go into bankruptcy.
Right.
It was Dorchester. Yeah. And then I went to Harlequin.
Okay.
And that's where I finished up.
And was this, I don't want to pry too much of the financial side, but we are all writers and there's a business side of this as well. Was this heading towards potentially an independent career for you? I mean, you loved your job. I'm sure you love your job flying. You probably weren't thinking about finishing that. But in terms of the professional side, was this turning into a professional career, or was it just pin money for you?
It was decent money, but not enough to live on. Not where I wanted. It was not able to replace my flying income, but it allowed me to take my kids traveling. And so I used some of it, I put it in savings, and I was able to take some out and take them traveling, which really ended up being the most wonderful thing with their upbringing. We went to 15 countries and nothing luxurious. It was, bare bones traveling. But if it wasn't for that, I probably couldn't have done those things for them. So to this day, I'm not in a situation yet where I can replace my flying income or get close. But I feel being indie, though, is my best chance. After only a year, I could say, if I really could work at this and put more time into it, maybe I could get there.
So you're with Harlequin, and at what point how did the whole indie thing come onto the horizon for you?
Well, it was 2011, my last book with them came out. And I was also with Berkeley with a series of anthologies as well, paranormal anthologies. And I still technically am with both of those publishers because they still continue to publish those books. I was not pleased with how things were going. I had lost my editor, and when you're orphaned with a traditional publisher, it's not good. You lose your advocate, the person who liked your books. She was gone. I think they were starting to have some financial issues, so there were like a series of assistant editors, and I didn't feel they really understood my books or were that enthusiastic about my books. So that was sad to leave that publisher advocate. The packaging, you would work so hard on a story, and then you had once, I don't know if many indies who dream of being with traditional publishers realize that once you take your story you've worked so hard on and you hand it in, you then lose control of it. You have no say in the packaging. You could get a cover that is awful and maybe it doesn't match your story. Or once in my case, I got a recycled cover. They just changed the title and put my name on it, and it didn't match the story at all. So I felt frustrated. I also would come up with some edgy ideas that, the committee didn't believe would appeal to a lot of readers. I wanted a space pirate female who had an eye patch because she became addicted to painkillers and how to work through that in the story. And I love that edgy character, but I had to get rid of the eye patch and get rid of the addiction. And the story was never the same to me after that. So I finished up my contract with them in 2011. And I really didn't know, I had no more desire to be in that world. I felt that it was draining my creativity. And there was really, the indie was just starting to get going, but I wasn't aware of it. So I just went under and became a reader again. I went back to flying. And in the 5 years I was gone, everything changed. It was like being Rip Van Winkle. I woke up and you could be an indie author. And that was a funny story how I found out. I was in a taxi cab in Tokyo heading from the airport on a layover with the other pilots, and it was free Wi-Fi, so I got on my laptop, and a woman I used to know who never could get her books bought. It was very frustrating for her because she was a good writer. I saw she was in a box set, and I said, wow, how did she get to do that? I looked her up. I found an article in a newspaper that she was now a multi-million-dollar selling author, independent. And I never knew you could be an indie. So I'm going to be an indie.
Yeah,
that's how it started. So I was 1 year into it now. I'm just coming up on 1 year into it. It's like if you go into a health club and you see a treadmill and someone's like wrapped it up to full speed and you jump on it and you get to throw it off. That's how I've been feeling. I keep getting on. Sometimes I can hold on and stay on there. And sometimes I can't. It's all the exhilarating freedom you could ever dream of as a creative person. But it's just so much work because what the publisher used to do or what you would want them to do, you have to do all of now.
Yeah.
So that's the hardest part for me to balance. Plus I work full time and I have 2 millennials.
Right.
So they take work.
So you must be a workaholic to an extent. I hope you're nice and refreshed when you're flying though. You must look after your sleep, right?
I do. That for work I have to I have to stop things sometimes, or with my assistant and say I need to stop. It's a certain time I need to go to bed and get rest, or if I'm on a layover, I have to watch my rest. But I can focus a lot. I can focus for long periods, so that's good.
So a year or so ago, when you started getting into indie, what did you read? Who did you listen to? How did you make your decisions? And what have you done? A lot of questions.
It is. So last fall, I decided I did a smart move. I started talking to people who were doing indie, some people who were fans of mine as unpublished writers who are now indie, and they were really helpful. Speaking to other authors, I would say, was my number one resource with information. And I decided to continue the series that I had gotten rights back for. I didn't mention it, but I thought it was a horrible thing when my first publisher, Dorchester, went out of business. And those books, I hadn't been paid for those books in years, and that was another demotivating factor because the slow, painful process of bankruptcy. But they went out of business and the rights reverted for my 9 original titles. Right. But I didn't do anything with them for a couple of years. I didn't know what to do. Then I started finding out I could get covers. They weren't ebooks at all, so I had to put them through the process where they're scanned and made into ebooks. So I had to start from scratch. But I decided to write my first indie as a follow-on to those books, yet also a spin-off. So it's number 1 in its own series, but it's number 4 in my long-running series.
You have those 9 original titles to publish now as an independent author.
I do. This was the year I wrote 1 indie novel this year. I had 1 indie novella, but the rest of my time has been spent getting those books covers, blurbs that sell and work, which is, it's not easy, as you know. and getting the books revised. And some of the early ones, they were still using phones with cords, answering machines that sat on your kitchen counter. There was no social media. Cameras still had film. There were old sayings that I had to kind of edit out. And so I must have done the equivalent of 7 novels this year, putting so much blood and sweat into getting these books better, because I'm also a better writer now than I was all those 20 years ago. And they're most of them are back up. I will keep pulling. I've got Contact is still up. That was my reader-winning book, and it's very out of date. And I need to fix it. But the story is still strong, but it's out of date. And so I've got 2 more, but I'm so tired of revising old things. I just want to write. I'm getting ready to write new stuff now. Very excited. If I ever get done with all the business aspect of being an indie, it's
you never get
quite
done,
a balancing
you
act.
never quite get done with it, but
I'm not going to get done with it.
Try and get a bit of a handle on it. So, are you list building? You're building your own mailing list now?
Yes, and with Mark Dawson and others, I have been trying to learn as much as I can about that. I've got a core list of only about 600 subscribers, but they're purely organic. They're on that list because they're fans of mine and they want to hear what I have going. I've done some other contests, and so I think total I've got about going on 3,000 if you counted everything, but some of the other people might only be interested in freebies or sales. So the mailing list is the thing I really need to build with organic subscribers.
Yeah, and you're dipping into our community, I think, and 1 or 2 others. Have you done courses? Have you done any of our courses or not? Or
I want to. Okay. I went to Dink and heard Mark there. I want to do all these things. I'm trying to figure out time management so I can do them all. And I'm trying to learn. I do have an author who's like a genius with Facebook ads, and I didn't have any up until this past month because I would boost posts, but I didn't know how to do the Facebook ads. I listened to Mark. It sounded like it was another language. Despite being a jumbo jet pilot, I'm not great with numbers. And I just couldn't get it. But now this author has just, because indie authors are really great with each other, she said, I'll help you. And so I've seen the results, and just now it's going in toward the end of the 2nd month now. We've got my perma-free being advertised in the Facebook ad. I'm seeing a great ranking with it, and I'm starting to see sales through to the other books. So it to me, it's convinced me that advertising works. I just didn't know where to start.
Yeah. Well, you've got a great head start, really, on most of us to have those 9 titles. And I know you've talked about the pain of having to go through and update them, but really that's a lot less pain than writing 9 new novels from scratch. And
I know.
And you've got those.
I'm very lucky.
That back catalogue that can, you can set yourself up rather than like the rest of us thinking, well, really by the end of next year, I might have 3 books if I work really hard. You're ready to go on that front. But it is understanding the world that you're moving into, which is a culture change, that's for sure.
I think that it's a long distance run. It's not a sprint. And I try to tell myself, don't try to pop in and have everything established like many authors who have been doing this for a number of years have. I look at what seems to work and I try to emulate what works. You can only, life can be a whack-a-mole game where, something crops up and you try to beat it down. I'm trying to be more organized. But I'm very grateful for the backlist. And even people who are listening to this and they're just starting out one book, you will eventually have your backlist. You just have to be patient with yourself.
When do you write, Susan?
I write whenever I can. I'm trying when I'm home. I try to do it in the morning and when I'm alert and go through like daytime work hours. When I'm on a layover, I'm many times 12 hours out of sync with my home time. So I'll with trying to make sure I get my rest, I'll write on my layovers in the hotel. So it's sort of not a really great routine because I don't have a set Monday through Friday routine. So I write whenever I can. And I've many times I write using the Note app on my iPhone with my thumbs.
Really?
So I've actually, if I'm on the checkout line in a supermarket or waiting somewhere, I will start writing, and I do that and transfer it into Microsoft Word. I also have just gotten involved with Dragon Speak, and there's a wonderful Facebook group. I think it's Dragon Writers for authors. I commute, sometimes it's 4 hours when I have to drive to the airport in rush hour. So I'm hoping I can start dictating.
Yeah,
I'm driving.
I'm going to have a go at that. So let's keep in touch and see how we get on with that. You're more used to talking.
Let me tell you what happened. Sorry. I was going to say I tried it for the first time on my last drive, and it felt weird. But I dictated for 12 minutes, and I came home and put it into the computer, almost 1,300 words, and sometimes that takes me hours. So I was very impressed. So production could really go up.
Yeah, that's a really encouraging start. And I know one of our listeners, Claire Sager's been talking in the groups about having an immediate success when she switched to Dragon. So she's pressing on with it, and I'm interested in doing it as well. So anything that helps the productivity, right, it's got to be good.
It seems like it'd be a huge boost. There are people doing 6,000 words in a day in just a few hours. Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah. So how often do you fly? Long haul, I imagine you get some days in between your trips. Yeah.
I'm lucky that I'm senior in the airline world. It's based on your date of hire. So in my fleet, the 747, and on my seat, I'm a first officer. I'm fairly senior, so I can have more of a choice in my schedule. I've been choosing to work Wednesday through Friday every week, and a weekly schedule. I prefer that. So on Wednesday morning, I fly off to, usually it's Korea, sometimes Japan, because I like the 3-day trips, not the 4-day trips. And then I'm home on Friday.
Okay.
So
that's manageable.
So I like that.
Although
it's very manageable.
I have this image of you in a hotel in Tokyo at 2 a.m. in the morning writing your books, which I guess is exactly what happens.
Yes. Yep, I do.
And you know what? And there's something, we've all got used to the world shrinking and being able to just get on a metal tube and get off in Japan or something. But it's still remarkable that happens. And there's still something about walking around. It's been particularly in a very different place like Seoul or Tokyo.
Yeah.
And that's got to feed into your kind of fantasy lifestyle in a way. What you're writing in your books is it's glamorous, right? It wasn't that long ago. It was the height of glamour. Now we all do it a bit, so it's not as glamorous as it used to be, but it's still glamorous.
Well, it helps me when I write pilots in space and flying spaceships, because I bring my flying into it. So I love being able to bring realism. But also when you're on another planet and you're trying to find something to eat, what might you eat? It helps me imagine that, because I feel like I'm on another planet sometimes when I walk around some of these countries and the markets. And that all feeds into it.
The things that are alive.
Yeah. The things that are alive. I mean, I will eat just about everything. I draw the line at insects.
Okay.
And organs that I can't identify. Well, and I went to a market in Taipei, and I wasn't happy seeing turtles and cute animals. So.
No, I cannot.
Just about everything else.
That sounds like a very sensible set of rules, Susan. And I guess you need to have some sense of adventure for where you're going. So I can't, all the authors have come on. I can't read everybody's book. We do lots of author interviews, but I'm going to pick a couple of yours because I'm really fascinated to see how they work out. As much as anything, learning from you, because you've been writing for a long time and I'm starting out, and we're in a similar sort of area. Mine's not fantasy, it's real world, but it's still, I want to get as much flying in as possible, because there's something the Japanese call in anime called fan service. Have you had fan service? And it's where they they will put something in there. So usually it's a bit salacious. So there might be some sauciness to the cartoon, and there's a scene in there that is there just what they call fan service. And for me, when the guy goes off because he's angry and he's taken a hunter off the line just to do a sort of check flight, and he's flying off, and you get lost in that flight a little bit, because that's what people want. They want some of the detail of what it's like to be a fighter pilot, because they're not going to be doing that themselves. So I'm very curious to read your books and get a sense of the atmosphere in the cockpit and the kind of culture of that, whether it's a spaceship or an F-18 or whatever. So yeah, I'm curious to hear from the master.
Thanks. I redid my 2176 books, and they're much more action oriented. They I have a lot more male readers for those, and those are about 2 fighter pilots that end up being put into stasis by the North Koreans and wake up 160 years in the future. So
cool.
I do have male readers for my books. I mean, I know my audience is mostly female, so I'm writing for them, but I may not always. I'm leaving it open now that I have the freedom to write what I want. But I think how I can best serve other writers who are first starting is by motivating them to not to give up. I mean, I still feel very new. I feel very new. I may have 21 books with traditional publishers and 2 indies, but I feel very new right now. Very humbled by publishing right now.
Yeah, but that's modest of you, but it's probably going to serve you well to have that attitude, rather than the person who swaggers in thinking indie is some kind of poor relation of the publishing industry. It's actually a tough nut to crack, and there's a lot more.
I've been in both.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you've probably got a new appreciation for some of the stuff that was going on in the background for you.
I think that it was actually good when I read a blog where they mentioned the publishers were the gatekeepers back then. And I'm glad now that you can go that route if you want to, but you no longer have to. And it also doesn't mean I will never write something for a traditional publisher, but indie is so exhilarating. It's tough to get noticed. It's tough to learn everything you need to do. But look at what you and Mark are doing and offering this and all the information on the website. It was like when I opened it up and I said, oh, there's a gold mine of information here. Of course, more mental overload, things I have to learn. But with the indie world, your other authors are going to be your best friends and the most help. In the traditional publishing world, I found sometimes it was like being in a dog pack, but there was never quite enough food. Always just enough to survive, but not quite enough to make you feel, satiated. So they would throw out a bone to us, and I felt like we were all scrabbling for a piece of that bone. There is nothing like that atmosphere in the indie world. It's like if the water rises, all our ships rise. And that is just such a wonderful thing and so great I'm very excited to be part of it.
Yeah, I think that's what we all love about this world, without question. It's wonderful to be part of that community and supportive of each other's successes and helping. Yeah, and that's
very much so.
Yeah, certainly where we're coming from, and we enjoy that. Susan, the time has rattled past. I'm keeping an eye on. I have to start one of the cameras again because it keeps stopping on me. But we're coming up to 35 minutes, which is probably a little bit over where we normally go with interviews. But for me, it's been brilliant talking to you. I'm really interested in your journey. I mean, I know you're feeling a bit overloaded at the moment. You've got to remember it's like your first couple of days in flight school, right? Overwhelming. A year later, you look back and you think...
Exactly. Yeah. It's a lot like that.
Yeah, so a year's time, you will have settled down a little bit. And if you would do us the honour of coming on in a year's time, because I'd love to see how you've got on and how you got things set up and how you're finding it.
I would be honored, and I would love to do that. And you promised airplane questions. Ask them anytime. Yeah.
I'm going to send you some airplane questions, probably just from my own interest. But and also I'm going to try and take a United flight, and I'm looking for First Officer Susan Grant on the dulcet tones on the tannoy, on the PA. Susan,
Well,
thank you so much for joining us. Good luck with your career. We will speak to you again.
Good luck with yours.
Thank you. What's not to love about Susan Grant?
So James has just returned from the bathroom.
Oh, please.
He's
Can we redo that?
There's I'm going to put them up on our YouTube version of the podcast. There's some very cool pictures of Susan in her aviation days. I thought she was a lovely person to speak to, really interesting, and bottom line is she sits down and she writes, which wherever she is. So those of us who try to make excuses when we've got a nice office at home and all the time in the world, and there she is flying around the world and still finding time to knock out these books.
Yeah, there's always time. I mean, I did it whilst I was commuting on the train in 2014. I mean, this is a bit more glamorous than commuting from Salisbury to Waterloo every day. Flying and having layovers in exotic locations puts me to shame, but it's impressive. She's done an amazing job, and it's great to see her really engaging in the indie way, coming to the dark side after traditionally publishing, and getting into the swing of things. Really good. Yeah,
well, she's a great example of how the traditional publishing model really doesn't work for many authors, and now indie is an empowering and opening up experience for them. So, and it might well be that she alluded to that in the next few years she may become full-time as an author, and she finally puts her wings down. But what a great life she's had and is having. So, yeah, Susan and I really hit it off.
Get a room.
Yeah, get a plane. Good. Now, we mentioned it every week, but we have an ebook which we have put together, which contains everything that we've done in our first 50 plus episodes of the podcast. And there's lots and lots of useful stuff in there, lots of links, stuff you may have missed. And we know that you can't necessarily mark out the time to listen back to all the podcasts. What you can do is you can search an ebook. And to find the sort of subject areas you're interested in. And you can download that absolutely free at selfpublishingformula.com/vault, VAULT.
Very good.
The vault of gold, vault of goodness, vault of value.
Vault of genius.
Vault of genius. How about a vault of the value vault?
The John Dyer Memorial Vault.
Yes. Is he actually passed away? He's on the floor down there, isn't he? I think if you're watching YouTube, you might be able to see him on the GoPro.
Is it any wonder?
Side camera. Is it any wonder? He's winding us up. You don't get to wind us up. Great. We've got some super interviews coming up in the future, but we thought when we ask people what it is they want to hear, they often say to us they want to hear from authors, and I think we all like to hear from other authors how they do things and what makes them work or what works for them. And so that's why we've had a couple of really good author interviews recently, and we've got more to come. So Susan Grant, H.M. Ward, a couple of weeks ago, and so we will continue to do that. And if you have a particular author who you'd like to hear, we can do that interview for you. So just suggest them, and we'll try and dig them out. And I know you've suggested J.K. Rowling, and I am trying with J.K. Rowling, but haven't got a reply yet.
We need a stunt.
Right.
We have to think about this. I'm sure there's some kind of media stunt we could put up to get her attention.
Yeah, I don't know if she's that sort of person.
We need to deploy the Dyer.
Why don't we pretend we don't know who Robert Galbraith is and just ask if we can do a Robert Galbraith interview?
It. That's a good one.
Yeah. So we want to do an interview with Robert Galbraith and J.K. Rowling because we feel their writing styles are similar.
I like that.
And see if she falls for that. Good. Okay, thank you very much indeed for listening. Don't forget all the podcasts at selfpublishingformula.com. You can email us podcast@selfpublishingformula.com. Thanks for listening. We'll speak to you next week.
You've been listening to the Self-Publishing Formula podcast. Visit us at selfpublishingformula.com for more information, show notes, and links on today's topics. You can also sign up for our free video series on using Facebook ads to grow your mailing list. If you've enjoyed the show, please consider leaving us a review on iTunes. We'll see you next time.